Hello, and welcome to Pathways to Healing, the Perfect Step podcast. We are your hosts, Cody Norman
and Logan Fry, paralysis recovery specialist at the Perfect Step, also known as TPS.
We are not doctors and are not prescribing anything, as this podcast is for informational purposes and should not be considered legal advice.
We are, however, sharing knowledge and experience that we have gained from working for years with clients in the paralysis community.
The guests on this podcast will include either experts in their respective fields or individuals sharing their unique experiences with paralysis.
Suggestions and advice that we share may affect each person differently, as not one injury or diagnosis is the exact same.
We are hopeful that the outreach of this podcast will allow us to give help and guidance for individuals suffering from paralysis.
We understand that this spread of knowledge is important and takes an entire community coming together.
On this episode of Pathways to Healing, we have on Stephanie Comella, one of the co-founders of Zebrafish Neuro, where they use innovative methodologies like Pilates for neurological rehab.
Stephanie will go over topics including her background and how Zebrafish got started, pelvic floor training, mindset training, the 3 different planes of motion, and tone and spasticity. Stay tuned on Stephanie's Pathways to Healing.
Welcome back, everybody, to Pathways to Healing. On today's episode, we have on Stephanie Comella, co-founder of Zebrafish Neuro. Thank you for coming on, Stephanie.
Thank you guys for having me.
Of course, it's a pleasure to have you on. It was so much fun yesterday. We learned so much. We're excited to dive into a little bit more about you and learn more about what you do and how much you help people.
Amazing.
Yeah. Would you mind giving us a little bit of a general info?
Yeah. I know you guys, the question is like, what is your story, right? So first off, I just want to say that my journey up to this point has been shaped by so many different people. And I don't know if I have time to touch on all those people, but it's just been a roller coaster of ups, mostly ups, to be honest, and saying yes to like every opportunity that's come my way. So I started my career working with neuro in 2011. Well, even before that, I born and raised in Northern California, Bay Area, and then went to school at UC Davis. I graduated in 2011. And while I was there, I was doing my sports med internship. And that was kind of my first dabble into rehab practices and sports science. So knew I really wanted to do something in that realm. I was also a personal trainer teaching fitness, so loved that. After graduation, I knew I wanted to do some sort of intersection between rehab and fitness and exercise. Wasn't super convinced that I wanted to go to PT school, so I kind of just got into the field and was going to make that decision later. So I got hired to be an activity-based therapist at an ABT clinic in Northern California called SciFit. And something funny about that stint of my life and that part of my career was, and I learned about this later, my colleague, he told me that I was on the chopping block for like the first year. Like, I was the worst trainer on the team. Like, I was so bad. I did not catch on quick at all. And I felt that too. Like, it was so hard. And
what capacity was so hard for you? I mean,
I just didn't get it. Like, I don't know if you guys know, like, there's people that get it and there's people that don't. Mm-hmm. Like, I was in that category of like, she doesn't get it. Like, I couldn't like estimate people's abilities. Like, I couldn't like have the foresight. I don't know. It was really hard. And clients were getting impatient with me. Anyways, I kind of just said like, okay, just make it 3 months. And then 3 months came and I was like, just make it one more month. Just make it one more month. And then finally like a year came around and I was like, I feel like I'm kind of getting this. And I still had my job. So I kept going. And then again, lots of people kind of in and out. And I found out about Pilates. And a couple of my clients was doing Pilates at a different with a different trainer. And we were just seeing some really interesting stuff come in. Like I would be working with my client for years on, say, bridging. And then he'd go and work with this Pilates teacher. And he'd come back a month later and like he could bridge. And I was like, what is this? Like, what is this? I have to learn what this is. So I went off and got my Pilates certification. I like drank the Kool-Aid. Like, I think I started my Pilates certification after taking like 2 Pilates classes myself. Like I drank the Kool-Aid. I was just like, I'm just going to jump in, like full in. Got my Pilates certification and then just decided that I wanted to be in a Pilates studio properly. And so left the ABT clinic, jumped over to a Pilates studio. This Pilates studio was actually just your like standard run of the mill, like boutique kind of Pilates studio. It was not a specializing in neuro at all. So I really brought in this whole different vibe and style of training. Basically I was doing at the beginning, I was kind of doing like ABT stuff on Pilates equipment, which we had to have a conversation with the bosses because they were like, I don't know if the Pilates equipment was like designed for this. Like we have to check our warranty to make sure this is okay. Ultimately it's all good. But yeah, so then just sort of like, again, just kind of like said yes to everything. Like once I got into that Pilates space, the doors just opened to this whole different realm of movement modalities and concepts, you know, outside of traditional rehab, outside of even like sports science and strength and conditioning principles. Like it was just this whole other realm that I just like words I've never heard before, like somatics. I didn't know what somatics was. Yeah. And then from there just got introduced to like so many different people and modalities. And I was very fortunate that one of my, not to say that we have favorites, but one of my favorite clients actually came over to the Pilates studio with me when I moved over. And I was thankful actually a few people did. They trusted me enough to know that this was going to be something good. And that's Theo St. Francis. He had a C6 injury. And he was so willing to collaborate with me. Like it wasn't like on me to create and develop this program that I didn't know what I didn't know Pilates. Like I was learning it and implementing it like at the same time essentially. But he was so willing to collaborate with me on that it was the not beginning, but it was really the launching of a really beautiful partnership in the growth of like who I am as a clinician. And then again, just saying yes to everything. Someone actually down in Orange County was like, hey, you're doing some cool stuff with SCI. We have a client in our Pilates studio with a spinal cord injury. Would you come down and like train our staff? And I'm like, I've only been doing Pilates for like a year. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. But anyways, I said yes. And I asked Theo to be my kind of like demo body. I wanted like someone that I knew, like I needed someone like near, like that I trusted, like little comfort person. But I also was like, okay, well, I need to put together like a manual for this workshop. So we, in all things Steph and Theo fashion, we ended up, I wish I brought it actually. We made this like 200-page book, like printed from just like a printer at Staples, and then like spiral bound it. It was like photos. We put it together in like a month, you guys. We put it together. It was crazy. That was like a wild month. So we did it. We did the presentation down in Southern California. And I'm sitting in the car afterwards and like reclined the seat. And I was like, I feel like I'm going to throw up. And Theo was like, that was so good. He's like, could you imagine if we did more of that? And I was like, no. And he's like, let's write a book. Let's write a real book. We did this thing, like we did it so fast and it's good, but let's like write a book. And I was like, no way, man. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm not a writer. Like English, no, barely passed English. So anyways, he was like, let's do it. We're going to run a Kickstarter. So in 2017, we ran a Kickstarter and we raised $40,000 to fund the publishing of our book.
Oh.
And it was end of 2017. I was getting married in May of 2018. And I was like, surely 6 months, we'll get it done. No, 6 months. No, no. So it took us 3 years to write the book. Yeah.
What's that book called?
From the ground up.
From the ground up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how much of that combination was you and Theo coming together for those 3 years and writing that book, or was it a lot of individual work as well?
A lot of individual, but it was all very, very collaborative. Yeah, wow. Very collaborative. We wanted that book to really be a combination of my clinical experience and like working with a broad amount of people, like hundreds of people, right? Like I've worked with hundreds of people. So like taking all those experiences, working with a broad amount of people, and then taking his singular individual experience and having that input in there too. We didn't want it to be about Theo's journey because that's just one journey. We wanted it to be a little bit more, I don't want to say generic, more broad. We wanted it to access a lot more people than say someone with a cervical spinal cord injury. So, and we wanted it, actually originally we wrote the book, we wanted it to be for clinicians. We really wanted it to be like, I wanted it to be like, okay, if I, for whatever reason, leave this career, like, what's my legacy? Like, what can I just like pass on and like package up with a pretty bow and be like, good luck. But then we kind of realized, like, why are we writing to just the clinician when we can just go straight to the person that's had the injury and like really speak to them too. So it was definitely a lot of like, we had to figure out like, how can it be technical, but how can it be layman, right? Like, how can we have this like balance between those two audiences? That was really tough. Yeah.
How much do you feel like you drew from the ABT you worked at into that book, and then also the Pilates background as well?
Yeah, I tried to, it obviously has a lot of Pilates flavor in it because that's what I've gravitated to and found really works for my style of training and like my brain. We do talk about ABT in there. It's such a core, I mean, it's how I started. It's such a core part of who I am. I think, and no disrespect to the Pilates community, I think Pilates can be a little light at times, whereas I think ABT really taught me, like, you got to push, like, you got to really take someone to their threshold and really like drive that energy out. And so, yeah, I think, let's see, to answer your question, like, yeah, there's a little bit of both in there. Yeah.
We're just
and
talking
still to
about
this
that.
day, like, I think my style of training, like, yeah, it can be very gentle and soft and really like nuanced and that, but then there's definitely times where I'm like, okay, let's just push, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were just talking about that last night. I mean, I had a great experience yesterday, thanks to you. The workshop was fantastic, and using the chair and then using the tone and spasticity workshop we did after was amazing. But I was kind of talking to him last night about how you can make that as hard and as difficult on your body as you want to, and you can be as intentional about it as you want to. It's totally up to you how much you want to challenge yourself during that. And I feel like, because you can kind of go through the motions and maybe not be as bought in. You're like, oh, I'm not that tired. And it's like, no, you could really like find a way to focus and push yourself and really like kind of destroy yourself with it.
And can we just, like, for the record, just say that Logan was shaking doing Pilates. That's like one of my favorite things is to like take like you're a strong guy, like you guys are strong people, and just like showing you that little change and intention makes all the difference in like a deeper integration. And it's like, whoa, this makes this so much harder.
So awesome. And then cherry tomato head too at the same time.
What?
Cherry tomato, holding my breath. And
Yeah. You got red. Yeah. Sweating.
No, it was a good time.
Yeah.
From your Pilates background or experience, you said you did it a couple times before you like drank the Kool-Aid. Was your positive experience in Pilates something that really helped push through? Was you loving the workout yourself something that made you like kind of want to dive into it a little more?
Really, no.
No?
What really was my buy-in was the equipment. Like when I first saw someone work on the equipment, and so like literally the moment was, so there's this piece of Pilates equipment called the trapeze table, which is basically a table with an overhead canopy. So think of like in like, you can think of it as like a table underneath an A-frame, just for like people's visual. And basically you can suspend springs from that canopy and hook it up to people's legs. So I saw a practitioner basically do that to a client and basically do active range of motion for their hip. You know how you do like supine active range of motion for your clients? And I saw them do that and I was like, oh my God, I don't have to hold the weight of their leg anymore. I can just use suspension. I was like, genius. I was like, I'm sold, because at that point I was 25 and I had insane back pain from work, like, you know, treadmill training, gait training, and just holding people's bodies. And I'm not that big of a person, and I'm working with big people. And I just also wasn't doing it well. I don't think, like, I wasn't taking care of myself, I think, in the best way. Anyways, so anything that I could use to extend my career, like, because at that point I was actually going to leave multiple times. I thought about leaving this career, not because I didn't love it, but because my body couldn't keep up. And I was like, how do I do this for a lifetime? Like, there's no way.
We say that all the time.
Yeah.
Because you've seen Jason, like he's
it's an anomaly. Oh my gosh.
you
so
don't
much
see
respect.
that. Yeah.
Holy cow.
I
Yeah.
don't understand how he does it, and we try to take some of the things because he'll, tell us, oh, I did it this way, and that really helped when I was having hand pain from doing manual therapy, or I stopped doing gait training like this because it was causing back pain, or whatever it is. But in this field, you don't see a lot of people who are 15, 20 years down the road
No.
of continual.
No, you don't.
I mean, even like small modalities, like Jason was saying, even the massage guns that we have now, how much that saved his hands from the pain that he's had over the years of not having massage guns.
Yeah.
And he's like, dude, the manual manipulation that I can do with the guns versus what I could do before. He's like, it's effective and it's easier on my body.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we need to get way smarter about that. Cause like, I literally remember my boss, like I remember starting this career and looking at my boss. I'm like, man, he's been doing this for 13 years. I'm like, holy cow, how do you get there? And you guys, I'm at 13 years. I made it.
Congrats.
I made it to 13 years. So I'm like,
Dang.
I can do this. Like, I think that's what we were talking about kind of before we started the recording was, you know, how can my story help other people?
Right.
It's not like I've gone through some crazy traumatic thing. Like, I don't have that kind of inspirational story like that. But like, I think the inspiration comes from, and actually this is my personal mission, is to help clinicians better understand how they can have an actual career in this. Because we see so many good, amazing, talented clinicians leave because their body's hurting them, or they don't feel like they can sustain like the career, maybe even like they feel burnt out just from the workload, like generally like the client load. And I think that all of those challenges for me that I saw in myself, and then I think also other people identify with, was basically how I shaped my program. Because I was like, if I'm going to do a program for the rest of my life, I need to create a program that like enables me to do this for a long time. So what I mean by that is I do a lot of touching with my clients. I'm a lot of hands-on, but I don't do a lot of lifting. So like most of my hands-on work is like touching, cueing, like kind of facilitating and guiding. Like you could feel it yesterday when I was like working with you guys, like it's more of like a like a cueing thing. But if I'm lifting a body, like that's not sustainable for me. So I've figured out a way to either utilize my tools better, Pilates equipment being a main source of that, and then also making sure that the exercises that I'm programming for my clients are 80% done by their own self-generated movement, like self-supported movement. And we talked about that back in June when I was here. But basically, if I'm doing too much support, like what's the good? Like I'm damaging my body and they're not, you know, it's like I'm doing it for them. So that's where I sort of was like, okay, you know, if I'm creating the pillars of my program, I'm going to actually move away from highly supported standing. I'm not going to do the gait training, not because I don't believe it's positive and beneficial. It's more just like I know that I can't do that for a sustainable career. So that was kind of like the biggest thing with Pilates that like started to get me thinking about like there's a way for me to do this job and not have to lift someone's body. That was kind of number one. Yeah. To answer your question. Yeah.
As far as your ABT program goes, and I know you said there really wasn't like a very, I guess, like one single reason why you got into the ABT program right after you graduated from UC Davis, but what was like the major reasons that you wanted to get into ABT in the first place?
Do you want to know the real story?
Yeah.
So again, I knew I wanted to do some sort of intersection between like something in the fitness and wellness world. And actually I was, so I graduated college.
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Were you an athlete?
Do you count cheerleading as athletics?
Was it for
I was not a good cheerleader either. Like no, I would not say I was an athlete. No.
Okay, that's interesting. I feel like that's unique in this
That's what
community.
I'm saying. Like I'm not like, I don't have any like inspirational story where like, oh, I like broke my arm and I rehabbed it and I loved my physio and that's why I wanted to get it. No, I don't have anything like that. Literally, this is the story.
Be Perfect Foundation is not just a name, it's a promise. A promise to individuals living with paralysis that they are not alone in their journey. Founded by Hal Hargrave Jr. in 2007, after his own life-altering accident, we are a nonprofit 501c3 organization dedicated to providing direct financial and emotional aid. Inspired by a quote from the movie Friday Night Lights, we believe that being perfect is about doing everything you can, especially for yourself, your family, and your friends. With nearly $10 million raised and a 100% volunteer staff, your support goes directly to those in need. We assist with medical supplies, wheelchairs, home adaptations, and exercise-based therapy programs. Our board of directors receives no salary, ensuring that almost every dollar donated makes a real impact. Visit BePerfectFoundation.org to donate or learn how you can get involved. The Be Perfect Foundation, changing perceptions daily.
I was broke after college, needed a job, saw a listing on Craigslist, thought it sounded interesting, but I had no idea what it was. Went for the interview. Like, I actually don't even know if sorry if my people are listening, but I don't even know if I like researched the company, honestly. I think I just showed up and talked about what I did. And they were like, all right, great. She sounds curious. And I was like, okay, what am I doing? That's literally the story.
Wow.
Yeah. And then just kind of like
You were doing personal training.
I was doing personal training, group fitness. Yeah. So like, I think I was working, I was like working at 24-hour fitness.
Okay.
Oh, you know what? I got a job at Lululemon after college. And basically I had to decide between Lululemon and this work. And I was like, by Lululemon, like, I guess I'm going to go over here. Like, this is obviously it's literally like not inspirational at all. Sorry. I don't have a better story.
No, I love it. What is your bachelor's in at UC Davis?
Exercise biology.
Exercise biology.
Yeah.
Interesting. And what made you like choose that major in the first place?
Yeah. I think I was deciding between like genetics and exercise science. And I thought that there was probably more opportunity post-college for a degree in exercise science. And I wasn't super convinced that I wanted to do grad school either. So I felt like if I did genetics, I would probably have to like go to grad school after that. So but yeah, I just felt like it was had more opportunity afterwards.
Did your passion start exercise like before college, or did your passion really feel like
I was always an active kid, like always an active kid. My mom called me the Energizer Bunny. I'm like, why? I don't know. I guess she tried to stuff me in short sports. Like I tried soccer, gymnastics, like dance. Like I tried all this stuff. I don't know. I just think I just didn't really like organized sports for some reason. My family did a lot of canoeing and a lot of backpacking and hiking.
Interesting.
So that was more of kind of my thing, was kind of like more outdoor adventure type stuff. And then in high school, I joined the cheer team. I joined the track team because I liked the guy in the track team, and then just did that. And actually, actually started dating him. So that was a positive, but he got me into running. So, so then from there I kind of got into running, and then I was like, oh, maybe I should supplement with some strength training. And then that's kind of just like,
snowball.
Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about this on your first trip here, but everybody always does the comparison, right? Pilates, yoga.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree. Yeah.
If you were to give your distinction between the two, what makes Pilates different than yoga, or yoga different?
We weren't going to talk about politics.
It's a fair point.
All right. So here we go. Yoga, and this is my limited understanding of yoga based off of what a yoga teacher has told me. Yoga actually has 9 facets to its practice. The movement component, the asanas that we think of as yoga, is actually just one of 9.
Mm-hmm.
So I think yoga just has so much more to it than what we see in like a traditional like yoga class.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if someone were to truly tap into yoga, they would get all the benefits, the mind body benefits, the spiritual benefits, all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think yoga focuses a lot on like the self and the development of self. And the yoga practice actually, and like meditation, right? The yoga practice, the asanas that we're thinking of, was actually to train people to be more comfortable in their meditations, to be able to like hold positions for a really long time and not be distracted by discomfort.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh.
Totally makes sense.
Okay.
Totally. Yeah.
I feel like if there's a yoga teacher out there that if I butchered that, someone call me out. But that was my understanding.
No, I would agree. It
Sounds great.
Okay. So there's that. So there's yoga. I also feel like, so then Pilates doesn't have a spiritual component to it. It's literally a movement, like exercise modality, for wellness. So what I love about Pilates though, is that there's an emphasis on, creating tension without the need to like push or pull on something. So it's like, can you create, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, like creating stability in the body. That's what I think really Pilates gives, is creating like this degree of stability of the body, like this core connectedness, this midline connectedness. We use the equipment to inform that, but then the idea is that we go about our day with still this connectedness, like a very physical connect. Yeah, there's a metaphorical and kind of self-connectedness that comes naturally with that, but more it's just kind of like this midline connectedness. And yeah, I would also say that, so I always wanted to be a dancer. I was a cheerleader, which is sort of like dancing light. I would say I feel more graceful and fluid since doing my Pilates practice than I ever did in my like quote unquote cheerleading like dance career. Yeah. I just feel so much more like I've got this like, I don't know, like I feel so centered. And then from there, when you feel centered in your own body, you can extend out more efficiently.
What about Pilates made you feel more centered, like to your body? I mean, you talked about a lot of midline, right?
Yeah. So the first Pilates class that I ever took, I felt like it was 5 minutes long. Like literally I turned around, I was like, whoa, it's over? Like, give me more. And she's like, yeah, time flies when you're having fun. But really what that, I think because, you know, not to get into like some pain science and stuff, but when you have back pain, it's like body disassociation and almost like a hatred for your body because your body's kind of like failing you, right? So when I did Pilates, especially that first class, I left with like the first time not feeling my back pain in like 3 years, 4 years. And it was like, holy cow, I feel like I love my body now. And it's not giving me grief and I can go home and be a happy person because I'm not in pain. So I think, and, you know, that may have been something along the lines of like, I learned how to like leverage my body and create this stability and support in my body that maybe was lacking beforehand. Yeah. Yeah.
So you answered my question super well. To give not as in-depth of a comparison between the two of yoga and Pilates, from my experiences, I feel like they're very, very similar. A lot of simplistic movement patterns while focusing on the breath and the feel and connectivity to the body. The main difference that I felt was in yoga, you're doing it with just the body and you're trying to yourself create the tension with whether it's the ground or just within your body. And then when you go to the Pilates component, you have something with resistance or assistance that you're able to use for additional tension. So it's like, yes, there's movement patterns in yoga, but they're not as tense, I would say, as the Pilates because you have that component of the extra assistance or resistance.
Yeah. And what I like about yoga is that it allows you to flow too. So you're like, you're creating that tension and sort of like flowing through, like you're like changing the tension points as you're flowing through your shapes. Whereas Pilates is a little bit more kind of like you're going to stay in that there's position. Definitely a component of flow in Pilates, I will say that. But like, it just feels a lot more like we talked about, it's like German. It's a little bit more like tempoed. Yeah. Like kind of like, force. There's a time and a place for both. And to be honest, the first time I did yoga, I didn't really love it. And so I kind of have just sort of like turned an eye to it. But there are a few specific types of yoga practices that I really like. I really like the yin yoga, where it's basically just like getting padded up and you just get to basically, and you just basically get to turn off. Like I love the spiritual aspect of yoga. That's what I love about yoga.
We kind of fell down I would say yoga rabbit hole during like COVID.
Oh yeah, because it's so accessible.
Well, it's so accessible, and we did like YouTube yoga, and we do 2 a day. Shout out yoga with Adrienne. She's great. Her and Benji. Yeah, but no, we kind of like fell down that rabbit hole, and I think it would have been the same thing if we had gotten exposed to Pilates, but yoga was just more accessible in the sense that we didn't have a reformer or anything like that. We were trapped inside the house. So it was like, but I feel like learning those root basics of body connectivity, body awareness, and breath work incorporated into exercise is the same exact thing as what we probably would have gotten from Pilates.
I say the same thing. I was like, I wonder if I had fallen into yoga, if my whole pillars would have been based off of yoga. I don't know if it's necessarily Pilates specific. Like I keep asking myself, what is it about? That's what we were talking about yesterday, right? Like I was writing and I was like, what is it about Pilates specifically that feels so good for me in this practice and offering that to my clients? Or is it just because this was the first thing I found? I don't know. I don't know if we'll know.
I stand with my answer.
Yeah, but then that's where we ask the question of your audience to say, hey, what this is all about is like going out and learning about different movement modalities, and then being analytical to say, what does this modality offer? And is this something that I want to go pursue?
And see, I love your openness to even willing to admit, like, maybe I wouldn't have been all Pilates if I had found yoga first or this. And what you keep reiterating is try everything. And I think that's what made you so successful, is that ability to get out of your comfort zone, go try new things, and understand that just because I have something that's working, the whole it's not broke, don't fix it No, there's always something that can make
Yeah.
it more efficient. So keep trying all these new things and keep spreading your knowledge base, because if there's something out there that can make it a little bit more efficient, then that's going to be beneficial for you and all your clientele.
Yeah. And actually, I've been really into this method right now called Bartenieff and Laban-Bartenieff studies, which is basically a dancer's conditioning. But it's all like floor-based work. And it's all it. I don't know. I'm like not a specialist in it, so like, how do I explain it? It's all about like, it's very non-anatomical, very opposite of Pilates in a way, but it's not quite yoga. It's like very, you're rolling around on the ground in all these different ways, and you're basically trying to say like, how can I roll over from this body part? How can I roll over from this scapula? How can I roll over from this ear? Yeah, and so that's been a really interesting trajectory. You asked me yesterday what kind of con ed I've been, I'm looking to pursue, and that was kind of my thing for the last 6 months. Was like I really like I've been studying Bartenieff for the last my first exposure was like in 2015, but I found a teacher that I really like that does remote classes, and so like really committed to doing that every week. And gosh, it's just so good. And for the high tone, that's the thing about the workshop yesterday. We had, I think, 3.5 hours and I was talking to Barry in the car yesterday. He's like, yeah, that workshop should really be a full day, huh? And I was like, yeah. Because I talk about the Bartenieff method in that workshop, and that has been huge for my clients. That style of movement, we talked about rotational movements for the high tone. Basically, that's Bartenieff. It's just like lots of rolling and twisting and figure eights and things like that.
Yeah. Can you kind of intertwine those two, what we did yesterday with the tone and spasticity workshop, and how Bartenia and the Pilates would have coincided with, let's just say, the nervous system tissues that we're working with?
And kind of like to rewind a little bit for the audience. So my program, and I think I talked to you guys about this in June, was my program. I draw inspiration from a lot of different movement methods, as we've already been talking. And so I'm very open with the movement methods that I study and pull from, just so that clinicians can, if they decide they want to go down that rabbit hole, they can go study it, like go to the horse's mouth. I'm just kind of pulling out the components of that method that are relevant for neuro. Anyways, for the high tone program, we talked about these clients with high tone, these people with high tone, they have a lot of full body rigidity. Right. So in the pursuit to sort of unravel some of that, we essentially want to create mobility. We want to create space in their nervous system and in their tissues, and then rebuild that strength, that voluntary strength, with like good solid movement programming. So where the Bartenieff comes in for that is the Bartenieff really creates a lot of spiraling, like rotational movements, which we talked about breaks the synergistic patterns, right? So that strategy, that movement strategy of like that avenue of moving your body around, that strategy of moving your body around is what I'm trying to say, limits the amount of extensor and flexor tone that happens in the first place. So your client's going to be less frustrated by their tone. And we know that frustration is also a trigger for tone, right? So if we can limit the frequency of it, then they're going to be less triggered to begin with. So there's that.
I think that's super interesting for us, because tone and spasms with our methodology that we follow isn't always technically a bad thing. We try to use the tone and spasticity, and you kind of talked about that, how you can use it for functional movements, or what we try to do, like repetitious patterning of a particular movement. So it's like you said earlier or yesterday, it's a catch-22, because if somebody is going to be using their tone or spasms to do something, they're not going to be able to do that anymore, and it kind of sets you back a little bit. But I think can be also beneficial, because it can reset so that you can find out what we're volitionally doing and what type of movement pattern do we have without letting the tone or the nervous system dysfunction take over.
I think that's like the communication aspect is so important, what we do too, right? It's like, it's so true, where a lot of clients that have spasms to create dysfunction, and let's just say they do a glute bridge using the tone in their lower back extensors or their glutes, right? And then we loosen them out. Maybe we do some penile or do table work, and then all of a sudden they go back and let's do a bridge again, and they can't do a bridge at all.
And that's so frustrating for them.
And they're like, "What'd you do to me?" And it's like, well, we took out a lot of your tonicity and a lot of the spasms that you were having, and now that dysfunction, we're not able to use that. But Unfortunately, we're able to use more volition, right?
Yeah.
More
We just
function.
have to make sure that you have time during your session to like
Mhm.
rebuild.
Rebuild.
Yes.
Which I think like we ran out of time yesterday for the early, it was like an abbreviated version, but that's basically the second
Right.
half is like, okay, how do we now rebuild these good movement patterns?
Strengthen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some keys? Like what would you
So
say?
then that's where the Pilates equipment comes in.
Yeah.
To finish your question was,
Love it.
that's where the Pilates comes in, where it's basically like I create this blank slate, we get some mobility going on, we get some like openness in their body, and then we can repattern with Pilates equipment and building that stability. Another thing I really like about Pilates for high tone is that the equipment's very supportive. So we were talking about yesterday how you can put someone in a exercise shape or like a body shape that's potentially triggering, right? Like for the audience to kind of understand would be like, okay, if you had someone doing a bridge and they start to use their quads and then their like extensor tone kicks in as opposed to using like a combination of hamstrings and glutes and like posterior chain that way. Basically, if you put the body in the shape of a bridge, for their brain to say, okay, I understand what the joint angles, I understand where the pressure is and all that. And then you ask them to activate 10%, activate 20%, or, hypothetical, whatever, arbitrary 10%, 20%. You can use Pilates equipment to essentially take the load of their body. So they don't have to give an all or nothing effort. They can give that 10% that's still within the realm of their volitional control, but not so much that it's going to take them into the trigger of the spasm. Okay.
I love that.
And then gradually go
off,
from 10% to 20%.
off the support, and then they increase theirs.
I love it. That's awesome. Because I think a lot of our clients do the shot getting of, okay, we're going to do as much as I can, 90, 100% of my effort, and then everything stiffens up, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to that slow, controlled movements. I think that's why I fell in love with the extra Pilates when we're doing on the machine, on the chair. It's like, you don't have to go super hard and really ham and stress everything, squeeze everything. Like you can do small little fine movements and they can be just as challenging, especially mentally and definitely physically too.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I really loved about yesterday. Another big aspect that was really fun.
Cool, yeah.
Are you in the retail, restaurant, hospitality, or petroleum industry? Looking for a trusted partner with your multi-site remodel, refresh, or tech integration needs? Look no further. Apex Imaging Services is your complete solution provider. With over 7 decades of experience, we're experts in everything from general contracting to cutting-edge tech solutions. Visit apeximagingservices.com to learn how we can transform your business, increase efficiency, and elevate your brand. Apex Imaging Services. Your vision, our expertise.
That mentality component of mental training, getting them to buy into what they're doing, even if it's really hard for them. Because we talk about these simplistic movements of rotating the scap. It's a hard feel for them to grasp onto.
Yeah.
How do you combat that when you're having someone, and I know you're going to say different cueing, you're not giving the right input to get the right output, but have you had a situation where you, I don't want to say got frustrated with yourself, but you were trying all these different cueing components and that feel of what you were trying to get wasn't able to get through to your client?
Oh, yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, you're bringing up like the ones that got away right now. All right. So, yeah, one thing to consider is that with this work, it can be very tedious because you're looking at like these isolated components, these isolated movement principles, right?
With a dysfunctional nervous system.
With a dysfunctional nervous system. And also like people come in and they're like, I want to move my body. I don't want to like do collarbone mobilization. So yeah, there's definitely like a buy-in factor with that. Reading that person is so important. I feel like so much of our job, right, is looking at the person in front of you and then adopting it. Like as much as I'd like to say like, this is my protocol and this is what I do every time a client comes in, it's not the case. Like sometimes I see this person, I'm like, ooh, they need to get their wiggles out. And so then I just put them on the floor and we do a bunch of rolling stuff and it's imperfect and it's not precise. And I'm like, look, they're just going to get their wiggles out. But then it gives me an opportunity to say, hey, you know how you were trying to roll over and you couldn't? Yeah, let's work on that. Let's pull it back. Let's reverse engineer it. Let's break that down a little bit. And they're like, yeah, okay, I can see how that would be beneficial. As opposed to, okay, you're on the table. We're going to work on scapular stuff. They're like, what's the carryover here? So sometimes showing them like the big picture and how it fits in is actually a better angle than, just getting to business. I guess if you would say it's all about getting to business, but there's definitely a strategy there. In terms of getting frustrated I had one guy that I just could not get serratus activation. And that's where, and I, I'm throwing out the kitchen sink. Like, I'm like, I've tried everything and it's not manifesting like the other 100 people that I've worked with. And that's where, and this is what my mentor talks about a lot too, Anna Hartman. She talks about being confident in your results and saying, look, if you're confident enough in your system that you can guarantee results or you can expect results every single client, then that one person that doesn't hit that mark, you can recognize that it's not necessarily my system, it's that I need to refer out because there's something, maybe there's something else going on here. Mm-hmm. So then I started researching. I was like, okay, serratus anterior is innervated by the long thoracic nerve, which is part of the brachial plexus. And I was like, okay, I'm like in my head, maybe I was justifying, but I was like, maybe he has long thoracic nerve damage in addition to his spinal cord injury. And that's why I just like can't get anything. Maybe there was something going on there. So I don't know if I was making an excuse, but I feel like that was a case where I've seen this work so reliably that one person, I was like, there's got to be something else going on here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, you brought up like, oh, that's like the one that got away. Yeah. Ultimately, we decided that my method wasn't the best tool for the job. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I referred out. Yeah.
What do you think you'd be doing right now if you weren't doing Pilates? If you weren't doing what you're doing with Zebrafish Neuro, where would you be?
Oh, I joke that I wanted to go into interior design, you guys, but I'm not good at that at all. Like, I want to be good at that, but I'm not. Interior design, I've still actually thought about going back to school, whether that's going to, I've always been interested in behavioral psychology. Mm-hmm. Because behavior is what, is what we talked about yesterday, appropriate behaviors, right? Behavioral psychology, but then I would want to study some sort of intersection between trauma, movement, and behavioral psychology.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that actually kind of leads me to my next question of, in this field, you are dealing with that behavioral component of the client psychology of they're going to have bad days. They're going to be mentally taxed in situations. How do you as a trainer separate the psychological component of them wanting to talk and have you be their therapist in a sense versus trying to focus your session on the body, because that's innately what we do.
That's our
we
scope
focus
of
on the body.
practice. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you've felt that sometimes they try to take that the other way, and that's not their fault. We're creating a safe space like we talked about, so we want them to feel comfortable and confident in us. But that, again, that's not our scope. So how do you combat that as a trainer?
I work with it. So, gosh, we're talking about Bartenieff almost as much as Pilates, but I feel like so passionate that people should know about Bartenieff. So a really cool thing about Bartenieff is Bartenieff isn't necessarily a movement. It's not like Pilates where there's like, these are the exercises and you follow the protocol. It's more of like an approach to coaching movement and a lens of like how to talk about it. Okay. So there's definitely a movement side of it, but there is actually, she drew the parallels between movement patterns and psychosocial growth. So basically, I think this one's easy to understand. She's got 6 patterns of what she calls total body connectivity. There's breath, core distal, head tail, upper lower, body half, right and left, and then cross lateral. Okay. So in other words, we could say breath, proximal to distal force generation, spinal connectivity, cranial sacral, upper and lower, which I think is really interesting for paralysis because basically how does the upper support the lower and the lower support the upper. Body half, which is basically how does the right side support the left and the left side. So it's like stance. And then cross lateral is just the oblique slings. Okay. They just say it in a different language. It's fine. But then she looked at those movement patterns and connected the development of self, whether that's development of self in the motor development progression or development of like rediscovering the redevelopment of self, hypothetically after traumatic injury, right? So she identified that when someone can establish or reestablish breath, they can reestablish or reestablish a sense of self. Okay. So if someone is struggling to find their identity after paralysis, you know, so much of that is taken away, and I'm hearing that in their voice, then I'm going to do things for the breath and the diaphragm, which is within my scope of practice, right? Okay. Similarly, here's a great example. One of my clients, he has cerebral palsy. He was really struggling with his relationship with his parents. And he really, really wanted to move out of his parents' house. He was like 18 or 19. He was, oh my gosh, like Chris yesterday. I was like, this is my guy. Like, I know this guy. So wanted to move out on his own. And, you know, he was going to figure out his 24-hour support and all that. He was going to sort it out. But his parents were really, really resistant to leaving the house. Yeah. In the movement sense, you know, so I knew this was going on in his life. And in his movement sense, I could not for the life of me get him to like load through his hands, like basically, and have like a pushing motion. Like I couldn't get him to like get this motion, like the pushing. And lo and behold, he moves out of his parents' house. He created boundaries. And then now all of a sudden he can push in our sessions. And like coincidence, I don't know. But according to Bartenieff, that's a plausible correlation to say when you learn to push, you learn to have boundaries in your life, or when you create boundaries in your life, that will also manifest then in your movement. Does that answer your question?
It does.
So I'll look at the parallels of, you know, what they're going through, like what life events they're talking about or what kind of keeps coming up. And I'll look at like, what is the parallel to the body connectivity and kind of help them go through that.
Does that kind of coincide with what you were talking about yesterday as far as somebody, the way they got injured and then how their body now is presenting based off the trauma of their injury? Does that have any relation to that at all yesterday? You're speaking about one of the clients.
Yeah. No, maybe in a sense, like, I think, so like if they have unresolved trauma that's like being stored in their body, I think they definitely should be going to a talk therapist. That's again, like referring out. Right. But I'm going to do my due diligence in like the movement sense and the body sense to basically say like, okay, what is it about that trauma that's unresolved? Again, is it like are they angry? Have they not found essentially their like next purpose? Like if they're still kind of like living in the past and they haven't found this like next thing, their next like, what does this life look like for me? Then I would go with like how I resolve that on my side would be that is core distal. So it's like how you are interacting with the world is core distal. Yeah.
Right. Can you speak a little bit more on core distal if you don't mind? Like, can you elaborate a little more about what that practice looks like for you? Maybe within even your own training.
Yeah. Core distal refers to the like what we were talking about yesterday with like the pre-initiation, like all of the checklist things to pre-stabilize. Right. To create force outwardly. So, and again, going back to like sense of purpose is like, who am I in order to create an effect in the world? Right. So that would be like kind of the psychosocial carryover. But then in the body, that is basically how can I stay grounded in myself and then like push open a heavy door or pull something in towards my field. Yeah, so core distal really refers to like this grounding in the pelvis. So for someone in a wheelchair, it would look a lot like how grounded can they be in their wheelchair and then affect the world around them. You've seen those people that kind of just like are not really like it's almost like they need to wear a seatbelt because they haven't found that grounding in their pelvis yet. So yeah.
Speaking of grounding, because it's something that you've talked continuously about, but also it sounds like your book took a component of that from the ground up. When did you discover this idea of grounding, and not to say it in a negative connotation, but how far down the rabbit hole did you go into finding out about grounding?
Are you or a loved one living with paralysis and searching for a path to recovery and hope? Look no further than the perfect step. Our unique exercise-based recovery programs have helped clients with conditions like spinal cord injury, stroke, Parkinson's, and more. With our approach, many clients experience improved function, reduced medication, and even freedom from wheelchairs. But we're not just a program. We're a community of support. You'll meet peers who understand your journey, along with specialists dedicated to your recovery. Visit us today at theperfectstep.com. The Perfect Step, where recovery begins.
Maybe we should define grounding first.
Love
Love
that. So when I think of it, like conceptually, I think it's a crazy idea for people who have a good sense of, I don't want to call it proprioception, but what you were talking about yesterday. When you're standing or on the ground, it is a like earth ground versus even as we're on like the second story of this building.
Yeah.
There's a different component to it. There's a different feel to it. When you're standing on top of a table, or if you don't feel the same as if you're standing on Earth's surface in a sense. That's kind of where I go when I think about grounding. Would you?
I think there's I would say there's like so many different facets of that, and that's definitely one.
Yeah. That's, I didn't want to call it like a
Yeah.
rabbit hole, but it's like the scope is so wide with
Yeah.
what grounding is.
Yeah.
What,
That's an interesting word. I'm curious, like, what other clinician. This is a good conversation, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
well, grounding, and then there's, are you familiar with like earthing?
Yeah, earthing.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, what are the differences? What are the similar? Is it the same
But I mean,
thing?
no, I mean, it's all they're all very similar, right? And I think the idea is the same, as basically like coming back to like your most centered place and most stable place.
Yeah.
So yeah, grounding in terms of like being on the ground. What do you define grounding as?
Yeah.
Before I jump in.
I feel like I connect grounding to connectivity from your body, no matter it's your feet, your hands, any parts of your body, to the earth, and it's closing the kinetic chain. That's what I see.
Yeah.
Using almost like force production and energy from the earth and applying it to your body and what you're doing in space.
Cool. Okay, so in terms of your question earlier with core distal, that'd be very similar to just say basically your most proximal place is like the ground, and then you're creating that force generation from the ground outward. Yeah.
Love it.
Your core distal, I mean, I guess like in a traditional sense, your core distal would be like your navel. Like Barteni talks about it as your navel, quite literally, your navel.
Right.
But I take it more as like, what is your most centered place? Like, where are you creating your force production? And for a lot of our clients who don't have access to their core, maybe their core is actually their sternum. Like, this is where they can find their greatest center, right? And then radiate from there.
So on top of that too, do you feel like sometimes where someone is maybe grounding, we maybe think of as grounding, they're holding too much tension in those areas too? Is that a possibility of somebody, okay, they ground from their neck or from their jaw, and that's where they feel like they're most connected to, but that's where also they use it the most, so they hold the most amount of tension in those regions?
Like we see people with like really strong necks, right?
Yeah.
I would say, is it a negative thing? No, I think that's like that's an adaptation. I think it's an adaptation for like where they are at that point in time. My goal for my clients is to help them ground or connect to their core. Connect to their core is so cliche, but that's truly like connecting down deeper. And like, again, like when I say like core and grounding, I would ideally want it to be more in like the pelvic bowl. Like here. And I think we've talked a little bit about pelvic driven movement. It's like, I want it to come from this like core center and radiate outwards. So while having it somewhere else is not a negative thing, like that's your adaptation, your compensation for the time being. My goal is to bring that down. I say energy. It's not really energy. I want to bring it down. I want to bring the grounding down. Yeah. Yeah.
So is that kind of your explanation of how you explain grounding is kind of bringing
so
that
what you would
energy?
do.
Yeah.
It's more like yours, Cody. Like coming back to earth, in a metaphorical sense and a literal sense of like, let's like come back to ourselves. Let's come back to the floor. But actually, the book From the Ground Up, that title, Theo came up with that title actually because he felt like the work that we were doing, the ground meaning like foundations, not the literal ground.
Okay.
So he was kind of saying like, oh, let's like start at foundations and build from the ground up that way.
Love it.
But what I love about this book, and I like, it's crazy. Like I look at this book now, it's been out in the world for 4.5 years now. So I feel removed enough from it that I like, maybe I blacked out with that writing period because it was just like so hard for me. But I like read it and I'm like, wow, this is very evergreen. Even the fact that it was written I guess 4 years ago is not that long, but I also feel like I've grown so much as a clinician since then that I'm like, oh my gosh, there would be so much more that I would add to this book. But I still feel like the work in there is like very evergreen, and somehow it was written that it could be interpreted still with the new knowledge that I have. I still feel like that stuff was like the foundation of it, even though I've like very much expanded on it. So the title even, I feel like has a different meaning for me now than it did back then. Now I feel like, and the turning point for me was actually COVID, when I had to go from equipment-based workouts to completely remote workouts. I switched 100% to telehealth or remote coaching, thanks to a few trusting clients again. Again, it's all been from people. And basically I went, again, from equipment to completely floor-based movements, ground-based movements. And so now I feel like my approach is very ground-based, and I use the equipment to refine, as opposed to maybe pre-pandemic was I used the equipment and I wasn't really on the floor that much, to be honest. So yeah, it has a very different meaning now for me.
So that component of what I was talking about, of you feel different when you're on the actual earth versus, do you have a name for that? What would you call it? Like walking on the earth versus walking on a treadmill. Yes, you're like kind of static, but
do I have a name for it? I would say it's grounding.
Grounding?
I think I would use that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because like that's a weird phenomenon. Like if I'm standing on top of a table versus I'm standing on top of the ground.
I wonder if there's an actual term. Is there an established term for that?
I don't know.
Oh, you're asking me that.
I was asking.
Oh, no, I don't know of an established term. If someone asked me, I would say, oh, that's grounding.
Okay.
With a question mark?
I just didn't know if there was like an
okay, anyone out there, if you know if that's an actual term,
appropriate.
Drop a comment.
Yeah, drop a comment. Yeah, let us know.
I think it's almost like a proprioceptive grounding feel. I don't know. I don't know if there is a term for it.
Oh, there is a term for it. Bartenief again, you guys. She comes in the clutch. Sorry. She comes in. It's called yielding.
Yielding.
And actually, this is more pertaining to you, where you're feeling the ground and you're creating force from it. So the term yielding refers to you are on the ground and creating a relationship with the floor just as much as the floor is creating pressure and relationship up into you.
It's like an ebb and flow over you.
Yeah, and kind of like a reciprocation. And then from there you can create the movement. So that concept of yielding, if you look at someone who like, you know, when they like get on the table right away and they're kind of they're like almost hovering. Ooh, yesterday Chris was yielding. Yeah. When we put the towels underneath him and his body just like surrendered. Yeah. That would be like he's coming into the mat just as much as the mat is coming up to him.
Fill in the gaps.
Yeah. Fill in the gaps. Yeah. And allow that like that connection, grounding connection. But I would say like, yeah, there's a term for it, yielding.
So that makes me really excited. Like I get really happy talking about it just because like so many memories from thinking about force production and grounding and the kinetic chain and coming relations back to baseball. I mean, we both grew up playing baseball our entire life, and pitching was that, hitting was that. Like how much can you use the ground for production in order to create the most force output that you can in order to have the most velo at the time, right? Velo or whatever it may be. So that kind of makes me like excited thinking about it, because now what we learned in that sport, we can rely and use as input into our clients. And I think that it's just so relational in those kinds of ways.
That's so cool. I feel like what Pilates is for me might be baseball for you, or like throwing for you guys.
Sure, right.
Like your understanding of movement like comes from your personal experience through baseball. And again, I wasn't really an athlete. Like I didn't have formal sports or formal coaching in movement basically until I got to Pilates. So like maybe it's more of that. Maybe it's like your first initial interaction with formal coaching or movement exploration, like intentional movement exploration. Maybe that's the thing that inspires you and like becomes a pillar for your coaching.
And, it's so cool. I've done this type of neurological coaching and then also coaching of baseball, of younger kids. And to me, there are a lot of similarities between trying to teach a dysfunctional nervous system and teach a kid who doesn't have coordination in their body. Simplistic, but very hard tasks. So when I'm thinking of like teaching somebody how to do a delt raise versus teaching a little kid how to swing a bat properly. I try to keep it simplistic. They're both feel movements, right? You talk about that a lot. It's a feel. You want to feel what it's supposed to actually be. You don't want to just throw it up and you can do that, but having a feel for what it's actually supposed to feel like when you have the scalp in the right place, you're using everything properly. It's a feel. Same thing with a little kid, right? He can swing the bat 150 times, but there's a feel that's associated with the correct swing. And then once you get that, then you get into the repetition, which I'm sure you do. It's like, okay, you've done it once. Now can we do it 5 times? Now can we do it 10 times? And then you don't see them for a week. And then they come back. And it's like, okay, where's that feel at? Or are we back in square one?
Yeah.
Are we on step 5 out of 50? Where are we at? And they're doing both was really cool for a while because I got a lot out of both things, but they were very different. And there were so much similarities between the two. So I'd love for you to start teaching, and I don't want to say like a sport or something like that, but maybe like watching somebody who's teaching somebody track or running like you did. But the teaching of younger people these complex movements is so similar, but obviously very different of teaching like a dysfunctional nervous system.
Yeah, and Cody, talk to me about how you feel like the inputs that you give kids is same or different from the inputs that you have to give your neuro clients.
It's the same. I try to be as simplistic as possible. They're not going to know like serratus anterior.
Yeah.
No idea.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so move your hand this way. And it's also a lot of hands on. Yeah, and it's a lot of hands on. I'm moving their body. Okay, do you now squeeze this as I'm palpating? You feel it? I'm squeezing. Okay, now squeeze it. Come on, squeeze it. Okay, now let's go through the motion. And I'm helping them while still being hands on. So like the cueing and the hands on component is there's so much overlap.
Yeah. Like, again, kind of going back to like, what's the right input for that? And for that person too, because it's so different.
Oh, it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
That reminds me a lot about what, shout out to Jason again, 17 plus year guy, but what he said about all of our clients and even exercise for ourselves too, for bodybuilding, hypertrophy, whatever your focus is, it's not just about going from point A to point B. It's about how you get from point A to point B. It's about what you're doing in order to get there, not about just getting there. And that like changed my whole, I think, like viewpoint on exercise for myself, even and for my clients too. It was like, okay, we're not just focused on let's do the bicep curl. Let's get the wrist from here to closer to the shoulder. No, it's about how are we going to get the wrist closer to the shoulder, right? What positional movement are we going to do in order to achieve that? What joint angle do we need in order to achieve that?
What joint angle is optimal? Yeah.
There's so much that goes into it.
Is good. Yeah.
Right.
But also like not getting too much in the weeds of it.
Yeah.
It's where like I have to really like stop myself that because I love the weeds.
Yes.
But like not everyone does, right? Yeah. So I'm like, okay, how much can I for this person? Like, how much in the weeds can I get with this person?
Yeah.
Do I actually talk about the anatomy, or do I do more external cues, or do I do more imagery, or do I go into like global movements? So that's again where we have to read our people. And that's where the behavioral psychology comes in.
Yes.
Like, how does this person learn?
Also, so great about yesterday and like having you have everybody yesterday in the workshop talk about what their clients did was really beneficial. I think because then I got to learn more about other clients I don't work with usually, like Kevin or Dylan, and then Chris, and then see what kind of tactics that they use was helpful for the individual themselves. It's not going to work for everybody.
So different for
everybody. It's specific. Yeah. So that was really fun. Do you have any other keynotes about the workshop yesterday?
I was going to ask enjoyed?
What
were your Well, I know we did thoughts, feelings, reflections, TFRs, but what were you guys' thoughts?
My favorite thing you said, and it is something that probably went just in one ear and out the other ear to everybody else, but I took it very to heart because I feel like it's the same way as you said, that the scaps are the pelvis of the upper extremities. And to me, I think about the shoulders in that same way as I think about the hips, but that comes from our background in baseball. And for us in college, I was a huge rehab guy. I was in the athletic training room like 2-3 hours every single day doing elbow and shoulder rehab. So
did you play baseball in college?
Yeah.
Oh, where'd you go to school again?
University of Laverne.
Okay.
Some
What is
Probably
that?
still down here.
T3.
D3. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But in that experience of all that rehab, we learned so much about the anatomy and the different exercises and the different how just manipulating one aspect of the movement of the ball and socket and then doing the same exact thing can get you a different outcome. And I think about that as the same way with the hips. But I don't think a lot of people think of the scaps the same way as they do the pelvis. So when you said that, I was like, oh my God, like that's exactly how I think about it. So that's
That's
my
so
favorite.
cool. That's so cool.
I think that kind of coincides with all the things that I was kind of talking about earlier, but the body awareness concept and the proprioceptive of what your body's doing and the good inputs with good outputs. That really, like, I think coincided with me, because I don't think that without buy-in, your session is going to be nearly as beneficial as it will be when your client is completely focused and completely bought into what you're doing. I just think that when there's so many distractions outside of what they're focusing on, not that the session's not beneficial, but you're not unlocking so many other things that you could have been unlocking during that session when there's other distractions around you.
Yeah. And I think it's the same thing. Sorry, were you finished?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
You finished?
No, I'm finished. Yeah.
Okay. I have a habit of interrupting people.
No.
I think that's even the same thing for us as clinicians. Like when we're not incredibly focused and intentional, like we're not delivering our best self. And again, going back to like, why did I create the model for myself that works for me? Like I probably have undiagnosed ADHD like most adults, but like I'm very overstimulated with things. So like even working in a clinic where there's like someone next to me or there's music playing, like for me,
Just try having
I'm very curious how today is going to go.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, there's going to be people and it's fun, you know, and it is such a beautiful atmosphere. And I actually really, really miss that. But I knew for myself to do my best work, I had to limit the distractions for myself. And then hopefully, therefore, I'm creating a better service for my client in front of me. And probably they're going to be more focused too. But I just knew, again, I really took to heart, like, what environment do I need to be my best clinician and offer my best services? And I like curated that for myself.
I love
That's
that.
smart, because
Love it.
I'm the same way. I'm very like squirrel.
You find yourself like gravitating towards a corner of the gym
I
then?
try.
Yeah, because like you can create that for yourself even within another building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I took my Apple Watch off. I had Apple Watch a lot, and during my sessions, I just like, I get a vibration, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, there's no point for me to be looking. If I look at my Apple Watch for 1 second and my client's doing standing, and 1 second I look away, that can be detrimental.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like,
I bet.
Well, there's a whole nother thing about Apple Watches. I don't know if we have time to get into it.
Oh,
maybe
later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's
No,
the thing.
yeah, same way though. I
Yeah.
just like all the TVs, all the music, all the everything. It's so stimulating that like you found, and I've noticed as I'm doing it longer, I get better at noticing when I'm out of that like zone of I'm very attentive and I'm very focused, and you know I'll catch myself more often. So it's definitely a growth and development as a trainer.
Definitely.
But
So I have a follow-up question on that then,
Mhm.
if we can.
Yeah.
How do you guys ground yourself before coming into work or before working with the client, or like even like switching clients, right? Because I know you guys are back to back to back.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
like, how do you ground yourself
I
so
would
that
say
you can then like be really in it with that person?
I'd say in the mornings, working out is
Yeah.
a huge thing. Just getting all that excess energy out and getting a good exertion to where I'm in the right mind space. We even started like incorporating the sauna and like a cold shower before.
Do you have
Nano
sauna
V?
here?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But like doing things
If it
like
was
that,
10 years ago, guys, I would have been here.
doing things like that to make sure my body and mindset are in the right place versus just waking up hectically, getting here, you know, am I going to be late? Am I the more create the hectic environment that you create for yourself? I feel like it exacerbates all those feelings of what am I looking at? What am I doing? And all that. So taking care of myself in order to be the most productive trainer.
My mentor said to me at one point, she goes, I've gotten to the age where I need 2 hours to myself so that I can be a best service to others.
Hmm.
And I took that to heart because, you know, I was doing like the 5 a.m. classes, like I was teaching the 5 a.m. classes, the 5 and 6 a.m. clients, like all that. And I was like, I feel that. Like I cannot be my best service to other people if I don't fill my own cup. And it was actually COVID that I basically put my foot down and I said, I'm not doing anything before 8 a.m. nothing. And
Love
that
it.
kept that practice. I don't do anything for anyone else before 8 a.m.
Besides
Unless
the
it's my
podcast.
family. Oh gosh, we did. Doesn't count when I'm on the road. I guess. But yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you feel like that really helped you?
Yeah. Really ground. Yeah.
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 I think for me, my breath, like when I get to work and on the drive here, I usually think about what clients I have for that day and have a plan. I start thinking about what I want to do with them. Obviously, our clients' bodies always present differently each day. So we always ask them when they come into the building, how's your body feeling today? But I do usually have a baseline. When I'm driving here, I think about my clients for that day. And then before I start my sessions, I always just connect to my breath, and then I say, okay, and then just go. But I mean, obviously there's more that goes into it, of course, like taking care of your body and, like you said, filling your cup, and self-love I think is super important. Meditation is my key. I think it's something that helped me during COVID, and along with us doing meditation and yoga, that I think brought so many benefits to me, that even benefits I couldn't see physically, but things that I just felt, and I just wanted to keep doing it. So kept doing it.
I think that conversation is so important for us because, again, the burnout rate is very high in this field. And like, we just need to make sure that we're all coming back to like, what are your grounding practices? Like, because again, going back to core distal, it's like, we have to be confident in ourselves. And when I say confident, I guess like grounded, connected, we need to be like centered in ourselves in order for us to put good output in the world and like reach out from that. So
Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So around TPS lately, we've been focusing on people who have been reinventing their life. So what is one way that you've either reinvented your life or one way that you've seen somebody else reinvent their life?
Ooh, yeah. Okay. So we've already talked about kind of like reinventing basically this model that I was working in wasn't working for me.
Mhm.
So I created that for myself. But then even then I'm such a maximizer. I'm always like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? When I was working in, I owned my own little private practice, like shoebox studio during COVID, actually.
Oh, wow.
It was like 200 square feet, like super small. But I was still working like my back-to-back clients and all that kind of stuff. And I was just getting this burnout, and living in the Bay Area as it is here, it's expensive. Like I was making good money with my practice, but just not, I was still living, paycheck to paycheck. And so we decided to move. So we moved to Oregon 2 years ago. We, meaning my husband and I and our 2 dogs, we wanted to create a simpler life that had less overhead, less traffic, less busyness. And so basically really reinventing my life up in Oregon, I basically was able to have 50% of the work in order to live a better life. Like the overhead was just that much smaller. And because then I was essentially working with clients, I would say like direct revenue hours, 50%. That other 50% of my week, I could really use to grow Zebrafish and like create an even bigger impact. And with that reinvention, so there was that on the work side, but then also moving up to Oregon, I live on 2 acres of land. I have 200 pine trees on my property.
Cool.
I can be in nature literally just out my back door. So that to me, like I said, growing up, I grew up in kind of high adventure sports, backpacking. I really felt like I didn't reinvent my life. I just came back to who I actually was. So yeah. So I love that question because
It's a great answer.
I'm like smiling. Like it just makes me so happy that I feel very blessed in my life. I forgot to say this at the beginning because a lot of your kind of pre-questions were like, what personal challenges have you shaped you? And I'm like, honestly, I have been so blessed that I have not truly. And when I do face a challenge, it's like, what am I going to do about it? And then I just make a pivot.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't linger on it.
Yeah.
And that's when people come to me about like complaining about their life, and I'm like, do something about it. Like, yeah, maybe it's not like a super easy answer, but let's like think about it. Like, stop just wallowing in it. Like, do something about it. And I said that in all things, and bringing that back to like neuro rehab. That's what I really, really admired and love about Theo was he was unhappy with something and he did something about it. He was unhappy with the services he was getting with his PT or wherever he was, and he did something about it. He asked me, he said, can we do something different? And I said, yeah, let's do something different. Let's go to Pilates. Let's try it. So I just really admire anyone that's willing to like look at something that's disgruntling and just say, hey, I'm going to take ownership about this and make a choice. I can either be in it or not.
Love it. Absolutely.
Perfect
And
answer.
that's what people that you've worked with, so many countless people you've worked with, and people that we work with here at TPS, all of our clients go through every day, and
Yeah.
the challenges, obstacles that we could never imagine. So it's amazing. Well, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Conversation, you guys. I can't wait to see what you guys do with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Part 2 coming soon.
Thank
Fantastic.
you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Pathways to Healing, the Perfect Step podcast. We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did.
If you found today's episode to be valuable, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, share, and feel free to leave a review by clicking the link in the description below.
If you have any suggestions, feedback, or topics you'd like for us to cover in upcoming episodes, you can go to our website under the tab Pathways to Healing and fill out the form.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another engaging conversation giving insight into the paralysis community.
Until then, keep inspiring, stay resilient, and roll on.
These are your hosts, Cody Norman
And Logan Fry.
signing off.